Muddy Waters was more than a blues legend. He was the man who electrified American music. From the cotton fields of Mississippi to the heart of Chicago's blues scene, his raw, soulful sound inspired generations, from the Rolling Stones to Fleetwood Mac. But behind the music was a story of struggle, loss, and a legacy that almost faded away. Now, decades after his death, the house where Muddy Waters once lived and made music sits crumbling, abandoned, forgotten by time. What really happened to his estate? Why did his historic Kenwood home become a shell of its former self? And how did a man so vital to American music end up with so little recognition at the end? Stay with us as we explore the untold truth behind his fame, fortune, and tragic decline. The mysteries of Muddy Waters' birth. Muddy Waters' early life is as hazy as the Delta mist that surrounded his Mississippi roots, and much of that mystery he helped create himself. As recounted in Robert Gordon's biography Can't Be Satisfied, The Life and Times of Muddy Waters, the blues legend often gave conflicting accounts of his origins. In interviews, he frequently claimed he was born in 1915 in Rolling Fork, Mississippi, a small town in Sharkey County. But the truth is more complicated. Muddy Waters was born McKinley Morganfield on April 4, 1913, in Issaquena County, Mississippi, in a remote settlement called Jugg's Corner just northwest of Rolling Fork. Compared to that rural outpost, Rolling Fork might have felt like a city, even though its population barely exceeded 2,000 people as of the 2010 census. His father, Ollie Morganfield, was a strong, cheerful man who worked as a mule skinner, hauling timber to sawmills in Vicksburg. He was also known for his musical talent, playing guitar and singing at local fish fries. Ollie met Muddy's mother, Berta Grant, in the summer of 1912. Though they never married, their son took his father's last name. Little is known about Berta Grant. No birth or death records survive, and sadly, she died not long after McKinley was born. The exact cause of her death remains a mystery. From that point on, young McKinley was raised by his grandmother, Della Grant, who was just 32 years old when she took him in. She would become the guiding force in his early years. Muddy Waters was raised by his struggling grandmother. Della Grant faced immense challenges raising her son and grandson on Cottonwood Plantation. Life as a sharecropper in the early 20th century was grueling and unjust, only a step above slavery. In return for a modest shack and a patch of land, sharecroppers worked from dawn to dusk in the cotton fields. Half of their crop went straight to the landowner, who then deducted costs for seeds, tools, and animals from the remaining share. Many plantations operated like self-contained towns, complete with their own currency, valid only at the owner's store. Whether life was tolerable or harsh depended entirely on the character of the plantation owner, and for a single woman raising 2 boys, it was a near impossible task. By 1920, Della moved her small family 80 miles north to Stovall Plantation near Clarksdale, Mississippi. The new landlord, Colonel Howard Stovall III, was known for being kinder and more generous than most, but life for Della remained punishing and exhausting. It was during these years that young McKinley Morganfield earned the nickname Muddy, a result of his fondness for wading and playing in the muddy delta waters near his home. For a child in that harsh environment, splashing around in the creeks was a rare escape from reality. But childhood didn't last long. After just 3 years of formal education, Muddy had to drop out of school and join the workforce, laboring in the fields to help keep his family afloat. A neighbor turned young Muddy Waters onto the blues. In an interview quoted by Robert Gordon in Can't Be Satisfied, Muddy Waters reflected on his early days growing up on Stovall Plantation. "I started early on," he said, recalling the physical demands of plantation life. "Burning corn stumps, carrying water to the people that was working. Oh, I started out young. They handed me a cotton sack when I was about 8 years old. Gave me a little small one, told me to fill it up. Though he did his part, Muddy admitted farming was never in his heart. Really, that never was my speed. But I was out there with my grandmother, didn't want to get away from around her too far. Despite the labor-heavy days, young Muddy found his spark through music. His grandmother, Della Grant, made sure he attended church every Sunday. Those services, filled with clapping hands and joyful singing, were a source of emotional refuge and a first introduction to rhythm and harmony. But it wasn't gospel that ignited his passion for the blues. That came from across the field, where a neighbor had a phonograph. "She used to let us go over there all the time," Muddy recalled in deep blues, "and I played it night and day." It was there he discovered the raw emotion of Blind Lemon Jefferson, Tampa Red, and Memphis Minnie. These early listening sessions shaped his ear and style, giving him a musical depth rare among his rural peers, one that would eventually change the face of American music. Young Muddy Waters made music any way he could. According to biographer Robert Gordon, music was a vital escape for the sharecroppers living on Stovall Plantation. With little to ease the burden of long days in the cotton fields, they turned to whatever instruments they could find or build to create joy and connection. From acoustic guitars and harmonicas to a simple piece of paper folded over a comb, anything that made a sound could become part of an impromptu concert. Music wasn't just a pastime, it was a way to cope, to feel alive. Young McKinley Morganfield, later known as Muddy Waters, joined in with whatever he had. He'd bang out rhythms on old kerosene cans and buckets, and even made his own makeshift guitar from a box and a stick. Before long, his musical instincts began to shine through. His first actual instrument, however, wasn't exactly blues material. "My first instrument which a lady give me was an old squeeze box, an old accordion," he told deep blues author Robert Palmer. "I must have been 5. I never did learn to play anything on it, and one of the older boys pulled it apart." It wasn't a long-lasting gift, but it was the first step in a musical journey that would soon carry him far beyond the plantation fields. Waters' grandmother didn't approve of his sinful music. Muddy Waters got his start as a bluesman at just 7 years old when he picked up a harmonica for the first time. "I was messing around with the harmonica ever since I got large enough to say, 'Santy Claus, bring me a harp,'" he recalled in Robert Gordon's Can't Be Satisfied. It would take him years, 6 to be exact, to really get the hang of it. In the meantime, his noisy practice sessions drove his grandmother up the wall. When it got to be too much, she'd simply send him outside to play. By the time he was 13, Waters had developed real skill on the harmonica, thanks to guidance from older, more experienced players. He started performing at local gatherings, picnics, fish fries, often alongside his friend Scott Bohaner, who played guitar. These early gigs were small, but they marked the beginning of a lifelong passion. But not everyone in his life was thrilled about his musical pursuits. His devout grandmother, Della Grant, saw the blues as ungodly. In the deeply religious South, any music not dedicated to worship was often viewed with suspicion. "My grandmother told me when I first picked that harmonica up," Waters said. "She said, 'Son, you're sinning. You're playing for the devil. Devil's gonna get you.'" For young Muddy, music was both a joy and a rebellion. Muddy Waters sold a horse to buy his first guitar. By the time Muddy Waters was in his teens, music had completely taken over his life. When his grandmother finally bought a phonograph, he did everything he could, scrounging up every nickel and dime, to buy records by the blues legends he admired most. He would sit and study the sounds of Blind Lemon Jefferson, Charlie Patton, and Son House, absorbing every note, every nuance, as detailed in Can't Be Satisfied by Robert Gordon. But it was a live performance that truly changed everything for him. At 14, Muddy caught Son House playing at a juke joint near Clarksdale, and it rocked his world. Watching House work his slide down the neck of a guitar was a revelation. "I stone got crazy when I seen somebody run down them strings with a bottleneck," Waters remembered. My eyes lit up like a Christmas tree, and I said that I had to learn. From that moment on, the harmonica took a back seat. He started learning guitar with help from local musicians, and by 17, he was ready to get one of his own. I sold the last horse we had, he told author Robert Palmer. Made about $15 for him, gave my grandmother $7.50, I kept $7.50 and paid about $2.50 for that guitar. Muddy Waters was a moonshiner and a fur trapper. Not long after buying his first guitar, Muddy Waters started playing at juke joints around Clarksdale, often performing all night. He earned up to $2.50 per gig, a decent sum for the time, and quickly saved enough to upgrade to a better guitar. A $14 model he ordered from the Sears and Roebuck catalog. Even as a young man, Waters knew he wasn't meant to spend his life on Stovall Plantation. I always felt like I could beat plowing mules, chopping cotton, and drawing water, he told author Robert Palmer. I did all that, and I never did like none of it. Sometimes they'd want us to work Saturday, but they'd look for me, and I'd be gone, playing in some little town or in some juke joint. But music alone couldn't always pay the bills. To support himself, Waters juggled sharecropping, which paid just 50 cents an hour, with other side hustles. According to Can't Be Satisfied, he trapped and sold animal hides from mink, raccoons, and rabbits. As a kid, he made money scrubbing used bottles and selling them to moonshiners, and as he got older, he even began making his own whiskey. The Stovall Plantation owners, perhaps knowing his talent ran deeper than the fields, mostly turned a blind eye to it all. A glass of water changed Muddy Waters' life. In the summer of 1941, word spread around Stovall Plantation that a white man was looking for Muddy Waters. Naturally, Waters assumed the worst, that the law had caught wind of his bootlegging operation. But the man wasn't a revenue agent. He was Alan Lomax, a 26-year-old ethnomusicologist working with the Library of Congress. Lomax was traveling through the South recording traditional folk and blues music before it disappeared, and he'd heard whispers that Waters was as talented as the late blues legend Robert Johnson. Still, Waters was skeptical. In the segregated South, a white man showing up unannounced wasn't exactly a welcome sight. But Lomax did something that shocked Waters. He asked for water and drank from the same cup Muddy had used. That simple gesture, radical in that time and place, broke the tension. According to Can't Be Satisfied, Lomax set up his portable recorder right there on the front porch of Muddy's cabin. After sharing a sip of Muddy's homemade moonshine, they got to work. That day, Lomax captured two of Waters' earliest known recordings, Country Blues and I.B.'s Troubled. It was a turning point. The first time Muddy Waters heard his own voice on playback, and the moment he realized he might just have a future far beyond the cotton fields. A wage dispute spurred Waters to leave Mississippi. In Deep Blues, author Robert Palmer recounts how stunned Muddy Waters was the first time he heard his own voice played back on Alan Lomax's recorder. To his ears, it sounded just as polished and powerful as any blues record he'd ever heard. A few months later, a package arrived in the mail. It held 2 records of his songs and a $20 check. Waters took one of those records straight to Will McComb's cafe and slipped it into the jukebox. Sitting there, listening to himself over and over, he quietly whispered, "I can do it. I can do it." But turning that dream into reality meant leaving behind everything he knew. His first attempt to move forward took him to St. Louis, but the city felt cold and unfamiliar. Disillusioned, he returned to Stovall Plantation and picked up work driving a tractor, earning just 22.5 cents an hour. When he discovered that his fellow workers were making 25.5 cents for the same labor, he approached the overseer, T.O. Fulton, to ask for a raise. Fulton shut him down. That moment was the final straw. With his confidence fueled by those first recordings and a growing desire for something more, Muddy Waters made a decision. It was time to leave Stovall and Mississippi behind for good. Muddy Waters invented electricity. Muddy Waters stepped off the train in Chicago in 1943 with little more than a suitcase and his guitar. By day, he worked as a truck driver. By night, he played at house parties and small clubs, trying to break into the city's music scene. But Chicago wasn't quite what he had imagined. Blues was dying out, he later told writer Peter Guralnick in Feel Like Going Home. There was nothing happening. It was pretty ruggish, man. Not long after settling in, Muddy's uncle Joe Brandt gave him an electric guitar, a gift that would change everything. In a city full of noisy bars and packed nightclubs, Waters needed something that could cut through the chaos. The electric guitar was the perfect solution. While others, like T-Bone Walker, had been using electric since the 30s, Muddy's raw, distorted tone and slide-heavy style, inspired by Son House, gave the blues a whole new voice. It wasn't just an instrument anymore, it was the sound of a movement, the birth of Chicago blues. Muddy Waters assembled a band of blues all-stars. As Peter Guralnick recounts in Feel Like Going Home, Muddy Waters' electrified blues sound began turning heads across Chicago's club scene. By 1945, his rising popularity caught the attention of Columbia Records, and he recorded a few tracks for them. But frustratingly, none were released. His breakthrough came shortly after, when a talent scout from Aristocrat Records, which would later become Chess Records, heard him play. After a few modest efforts, Waters finally struck gold in 1950 with the release of Rollin' Stone, a track that would not only become a hit, but also inspire the name of one of the greatest rock bands in history. Just before Rollin' Stone was released, Waters formed his first official band. In the cutthroat world of Chicago blues clubs, his crew quickly developed a reputation as one of the fiercest acts around. With Waters on guitar and vocals, joined by future legends Jimmie Rodgers on guitar and Little Walter on harmonica, the trio took no prisoners. Back in 47 or 48, Little Walter, Jimmie Rodgers, and myself, we would go around looking for bands that were playing, Waters recalled in Downbeat magazine. We called ourselves the Headhunters, 'cause if we got a chance, we were gonna burn 'em. Muddy Waters brought the blues to Britain. In 1954, Muddy Waters reached the peak of his recording career. That year, he scored 3 singles in Billboard's R&B Top 10, including 2 of his most iconic hits, Hoochie Coochie Man and I Just Want to Make Love to You. With his raw power and electrified sound, Waters reshaped the blues and laid the groundwork for a new era of music. But just 2 years later, in 1956, the tides began to shift. Rock and roll was taking over, and ironically, one of its rising stars, Chuck Berry, had been introduced to Chess Records by Waters himself. Blues sales plummeted, and Waters found himself booking more local gigs just to stay afloat. As detailed in Can't Be Satisfied, while American audiences were drifting away, across the Atlantic a new crowd was listening intently. British musicians like jazz band leader Chris Barber were obsessed with the Delta and Chicago blues sound. They had already brought legends like Sister Rosetta Tharpe and Sonny Terry to perform in the UK, but Muddy Waters was the act they dreamed of landing. When Waters finally arrived in England in 1958, British fans expected a gentle, acoustic folk bluesman. Instead, they got roaring electric blues, and it blew the roof off. While some blues purists were stunned by the volume and intensity, a new generation of musicians was electrified, literally and figuratively. Among them were Eric Clapton, Mick Jagger, Keith Richards, and Eric Burdon, all of whom would go on to revive and reintroduce the blues to the world, thanks to Muddy Waters. A 1960s attempt to repackage Waters as a rock artist failed. As the 1960s rolled in, a wave of young British rock bands reignited interest in the blues, thanks largely to Muddy Waters. The Rolling Stones, who famously named themselves after one of his songs, along with groups like the Animals and the Yardbirds, began covering his music and spreading his gritty electric blues sound to a whole new generation. Ironically, the same rock and roll revolution that had once sidelined him now placed Waters back in the spotlight as a foundational influence. But not all attempts to keep him relevant hit the right notes. In 1968, Chess Records tried to repackage Waters for the psychedelic rock era with an album called Electric Mud. The project was spearheaded by Marshall Chess, son of label founder Leonard Chess, and it pushed Waters into a strange new territory, layering his raw blues vocals over fuzzed-out guitars and psychedelic effects. According to biographer Robert Gordon, Waters wasn't comfortable with the direction, but went along out of loyalty, muttering, "You don't cross the boss." Although Electric Mud initially sold well, the backlash was swift. Critics slammed it, and Waters himself didn't hold back either. "That Electric Mud record I did, that one was dog-sh-tea," he later said bluntly. "At first it sold like crazy, then they started sending them back. They said, 'This can't be Muddy Waters with all this wow-wow and fuzz-tone going on.'" Despite the misstep, Waters' legacy as the godfather of electric blues was already sealed. Muddy Waters played his final shows with rock royalty. As chronicled in Can't Be Satisfied, Muddy Waters made his final recorded appearance on November 22, 1981, at Buddy Guy's Checkerboard Lounge in Chicago. It was a historic night. The Rolling Stones joined him on stage, and despite his frail appearance, Waters shared vocals with Mick Jagger on Hoochie Coochie Man, commanding the room with the same raw energy that had made him a legend. But not long after that powerful moment, Waters collapsed, his long battle with high blood pressure and newly diagnosed cancer catching up with him. He underwent surgery to remove part of a lung, but declined chemotherapy. Amazingly, his cancer went into remission, and by spring 1982, he was strong enough to step on stage once more. On June 30th, in a surprise appearance, he joined Eric Clapton in Miami to perform Blow Wind Blow. It was his final time playing live. Soon after returning home to Chicago, Waters began coughing up blood. His cancer had returned, more aggressive than before. Just 3 weeks after celebrating his 70th birthday, on April 30th, 1983, Muddy Waters, born McKinley Morganfield, passed away from cardiorespiratory arrest and lung cancer. The blues had lost its patriarch, but his influence still echoes through every riff of electric guitar that followed. What happened to Muddy Waters' estate after his death? At the time of his death, his estate was valued at approximately $5 million, which would be about $14.2 million today. According to the Chicago Tribune, Waters' will specified that his assets be divided among his wife, 4 children, and a great-granddaughter. Before he died, Waters appointed his longtime manager, Scott Cameron, as executor of his estate. In addition to handling the distribution of his assets, Cameron was also entrusted with overseeing Waters' copyrights, royalties, and publishing rights. For years, Cameron remained the steward of Waters' musical legacy, continuing to manage his catalog and brand even after Waters' death. However, in 2010, nearly 3 decades later, Waters' family raised concerns. They penned a letter to the Cameron Organization, expressing frustration over declining income from the bluesman's music and the lack of transparent financial records. What followed was a prolonged legal battle between the Morganfield family and Waters' former management. The dispute dragged on for years, leaving the legendary musician's estate mired in controversy and unresolved questions about the true value and control of his iconic legacy. In 2018, Waters' daughter brought a lawsuit against Cameron's company. Legally, Muddy Waters' estate was considered settled back in 1987. However, decades later in 2010, his family reignited the issue by drafting a letter to the Cameron Organization, then managed by Waters' longtime manager, Scott Cameron, raising concerns about how the late musician's assets were being handled. The Morganfield family claimed that the estate had been mismanaged and petitioned the court to reopen it, seeking a full accounting of assets still under the company's control. Central to their complaint was an allegation that Scott Cameron had withheld roughly $2 million in royalty payments between 2008 and 2014, money the family believed they were entitled to under Waters' will. According to that will, royalties and catalog earnings were to be distributed to Waters' heirs twice a year. Despite claims by Cameron's legal team that the lawsuit was outside the statute of limitations, the court allowed the estate to be reopened. In response, lawyers representing the Cameron organization, by then run by Scott Cameron's widow, Elizabeth, argued that no wrongdoing had occurred. They maintained that the company had paid millions in royalties to the family since the estate was originally settled. Nonetheless, the Morganfields pushed for full control over Waters' legacy and financial assets, asking the court to return all rights and materials to the family. The dispute marked a painful and protracted battle over one of blues music's most treasured legacies. Scott Cameron's widow disputes the ruling. As of 2018, the legal battle over Muddy Waters' estate was still unresolved, according to the Chicago Tribune, and to this day its final status remains uncertain. Elizabeth Cameron, the widow of Waters' longtime manager Scott Cameron, chose to represent herself in the ongoing case from her home in Florida. In her defense, she argued that honoring Muddy Waters' final wishes meant keeping control of his catalog, royalties, and copyrights within the Cameron organization. Handing those rights back to the Morganfield family, she claimed, would go against what Waters intended. Her legal team also maintained that the estate should never have been reopened in the first place, citing that the statute of limitations had long since passed, a point supported by Wealth Management. Adding to the tension, Cameron alleged that the Morganfield family still held two rare guitars that Waters had intended to donate to a museum, and therefore, she insisted, those instruments should be returned to the Cameron organization. The decades-long legal fight has not only stalled Waters' estate, but also complicated his legacy, raising questions about how the music of legends should be preserved and by whom. Muddy Waters may be gone, but his voice still echoes through every blues riff, every slide of a guitar string, and every artist he inspired, from the cotton fields of Mississippi to the packed arenas of British rock. Yet the battles over his legacy, his estate, his royalties, even his cherished guitars, reveal a painful truth. Sometimes the fight over a legend's name outlives the legend himself. What do you think should happen to Muddy Waters' estate? Should it remain with his longtime manager's organization or be returned to his family? Let us know in the comments below. And if you want more powerful stories like this one of music, mystery, and legacy, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for future videos. See you next time.